Hello, everyone. It's been a bit. I have been failing to uphold my end of this deal. So, first of all, we are on chapter 11, in which Charmaine kneels on a cake. The interesting thing is, each of the chapters is pretty much exactly 20 pages every single time. So we're going from chapter 11 to chapter 15. And it looks like it'll be... That's where the camera is. Looks like it'll be pretty quick, which is interesting. The other thing is, since it is now spoopy season, I went ahead and picked up Coraline. So once we are done with House of Many Ways, we will have spoopy times. So right now I'm still reading it to vet it, but that is the plan, and worst to worst, I'll just flip back to Neverwhere. Alright, excuse me. So, the shop was closed when Charmaine reached it, but she could see dimly through the glass someone moving about inside, cleaning up. Charmaine rapped on the door, and when that did no good, put her face to the glass and shouted, "Let me in!" The person inside at length shuffled over and opened the door just enough to put his face round it. He proved to be an apprentice about Peter's age, whom Charmaine had never met. "We're closed," he said. His eyes went to Waif in Charmaine's arms. The open door had let out a gust of recent donut smells, and Waif had got her nose into it, sniffing rapturously. "And we don't allow dogs," he said, "'cause he is wicked." "I need to see my father," Charmaine said. "You can't see anyone," the apprentice said. "The bakehouse is still busy." "My father is Mr. Baker," Charmaine told him, "and I know he'll see me. Now let me in." "How do I know that's the truth?" the apprentice said suspiciously. "It's as much as my job's worth." Charmaine knew this was the sort of time when she needed to be polite and tactful, but she ran out of patience just as she had with the kobolds. "Oh, you silly boy," she interrupted him. If my father heard about this, knew you weren't letting me in, he'd sack you on the spot. Now go and fetch him if you don't believe me." "Hoity-toity," said the apprentice. But he backed away from the door, saying, "Come on in then, but leave the dog outside, you understand?" "No, I don't," Charmaine said. "She might be stolen. She's a highly valuable, magical dog. I'll have you know, and even the king lets her in. If he can, then so can you." Opal is busy playing with her rainbow lamb chop. The apprentice looked scornful. "Tell that to the Lubbock on the hills," he said. Things might have become very difficult then if Belle, one of the ladies who served in the shop, had not come through the bakehouse door just then. She was tying on her headscarf and saying, "I'm leaving now, Timmy. Mind you wash down all the—" When she saw Charmaine. "Oh, hello, Charmaine. Want to see your dad, do you?" "Hello, Belle. Yes, I do," Charmaine said. "But he won't let me bring Waif in." Belle looked at Waif. Her face melted into a smile. "What a sweet little creature. But you know what your dad thinks about dogs coming in here. Better leave her in the shop for Timmy to look after. You'll take care of her, won't you, Timmy?" The apprentice made a grudging noise and glowered at Charmaine. "But I warn you, Charmaine," Belle continued in her usual chatty way. "They're very busy through there. There's an order for a special cake. You won't stay long, will you? Put your little dog down here, and she'll be quite safe. And, Timmy, I want those shelves cleaned down properly this time, or I'll have words to say to you tomorrow. Ta-ra, night-night." Those words are probably butt and fart. Belle swept out of the shop, and Charmaine swept past her into it. Charmaine did have thoughts of sweeping onward into the bakehouse with Waif, but she knew Waif's record with food was not good. So she deposited Waif beside the counter, gave Timmy a cold nod, and he'll hate me for the rest of his life, she thought. And she stalked on alone past the empty glass cases and the cool marble shelves and the clusters of white tables and chairs, where the citizens of High Norland were accustomed to sit for coffee and rich cakes. Waif gave a desperate whine as Charmaine pushed open the bakehouse door, but Charmaine hardened her heart and pushed the door shut behind herself. It was busy as a hive in there and tropically hot, and full of scents that would certainly have driven Waif mad with greed. There was the smell of new dough and dough cooking, and the sweet scent of buns and tarts and waffles overlaid with savory smells from pasties and quiches, which were all overlaid in turn by strong odors of cream and flavored icing from the large, many-layered cake that several people were decorating on the table nearest the door. Rosewater, Charmaine thought, inhaling those scents. Lemon, strawberry, almonds from South Ingray, cherries, peaches. Mr. Baker was striding from work to worker, instructing, encouraging, and inspecting as he went. "Jake, you have to put your back into kneading that dough," Charmaine heard him saying as she came in, and a moment later, "A light hand with that pastry, Nancy. Don't hammer it, or it'll be like a rock." A moment after that, he was off down to the baking ovens, and at the other end, telling the young man which oven to use, and wherever he went, he got instant attention and obedience. Her father, Charmaine knew, was a king in his bakehouse, more of a king than the real king in the royal mansion, she thought. His white hat sat on his head like a crown. It suited him, too, Charmaine thought. He was thin-faced and ginger-haired like she was herself, though much more freckly. She ran him down by the stoves, where he was tasting a savory meat filling and telling the girl making it that there was too much spice in it. "It tastes good, though," the girl protested. "Maybe," said Mr. Baker, "but there's a world of difference between good taste and a perfect one, Lorna. You cut along and help them with the cake, or they'll be at it all night. I'll have a go at rescuing this filling." He took the saucepan off the flames as Lorna hurried off, looking mightily relieved. He turned round with it and saw Charmaine. "Oh, hello, sweetheart. I wasn't expecting you." A slight doubt came over him. "Did your mother send you?" "No," Charmaine said. "I came by myself. I'm looking after Great Uncle William's house, remember?" "Oh, so you are," her father said. What can I do for you?" Charmaine said. This was hard to say, now that she had been reminded what an expert her father was. "Just a moment." And he turned to search through rows of powdered herbs and spices on a shelf beside the stoves. He selected a jar, uncapped it, and shook just a sprinkle of something into the saucepan. He stirred the mixture in, tasted it, and nodded. "That'll do for now," he said, putting the saucepan down to cool. Then he looked questioningly at Charmaine. "I don't know how to cook, Dad," she blurted out, "and the food for the evening comes in raw at Great Uncle William's house. You don't happen to have any instructions written, do you? For apprentices or something?" Mr. Baker pulled at his freckly chin with his clean hand, thinking. "I was told your mother you'd need to know some of those things," he said, "respectable or not. Well, let's see, most of what I've got will be a bit advanced for you. Patisserie and gourmet sauces and such. I expect my apprentices to come to me knowing the basics these days, but I think I may still have some of the elementary simple notes from back when I started. Let's go and see, shall we?" He led the way across the bakehouse, along the thronging, busy cooks to the far wall. One of the bolts fell out of my chair earlier, so if I suddenly fall to the floor, that is why. He led the way across the bakehouse, among the thronging, busy cooks to the far wall. There were a few rickety shelves here there, piled higgledy-piggledy with notebooks, pieces of paper with jam stains on them, and fat piles covered with floury fingerprints. "Wait a moment," Mr. Baker said, pausing by the leftovers table beside the shelves. "I'd better give you some food to go home with, while you're reading up on it, hadn't I?" Charmaine knew this table well. Waif would have loved it, if she weren't so cruelly left behind. Poor Waif! On it were any pieces of baking that had not turned out quite perfect. Broken tarts, lopsided buns, and cracked pasties, together with all the things from the shop that had not been sold that day. The bakehouse workers were allowed to carry these things home if they wanted them. Mr. Baker picked up one of the sacking bags the workers used and began swiftly filling it. A whole cream cake went in at the bottom, followed by a layer of pasties, then buns, donuts, and finally a large cheese flan. He left the bulging bag on the table while he searched about on the shelves. "Here we are," he said, pulling forth a floppy brown notebook, dark with old grease. "I thought I still had it." This was from when I started as a lad in the restaurant on Marketplace. I was as ignorant as you are then, so it should be just what you need. Do you want the spells that go with the recipes? Spells? Said Charmaine. But Dad! Mr. Baker looked as guilty as Charmaine had ever seen him. His freckles for a moment were drowned in redness. I know, Charmaine. Your mother will have 70 fits. She'll insist that magic is low, vulgar stuff. But I was born a magic user, and I can't help myself. Not when I'm cooking. We use magic all the time here in the bakehouse. Be a good, kind girl. Don't let your mother know. Please? He pulled a thin yellow notebook off the shelves and flapped it wistfully. These, in here, are all plain, simple spells that work. Do you want this? Oh, yes, please, Charmaine said. And of course I won't say a word to Mother. I know what she's like as well as you do. Good girl, said Mr. Baker. He swiftly slid both notebooks down into the bag beside the cheese flan and passed Charmaine the bag. They grinned at one another like conspirators. Happy eating, Mr. Baker said, and good luck. You too, Charmaine said. And thank you, Dad. She stretched up and kissed him on his flowery, freckled cheek just below the cook's hat, and then made her way out of the bakehouse. You lucky thing, Lorna called out to her while Charmaine was pushing open the door. I had my eye on that cream cake he gave you. There were 2 of them, Charmaine called over her shoulder as she went into the shop. There, to her surprise, she found Timmy sitting on the glass and marble counter with Waif in his arms. He explained rather defensively. She was really upset after you left her. Started howling her head off. Perhaps we won't be lifelong enemies after all, Charmaine thought, as Waif leapt out of Timmy's arms, shrieking with delight. That's my little girl. She danced about Charmaine's ankles and generally made such a noise that Timmy evidently did not hear Charmaine thank him. Charmaine made sure to give him a great smile and to nod at him as she went out into the street, with Waif frisking and squeaking around her feet. The shop and bakehouse were on the other side of town from the river and the embankment. Charmaine could have cut across there, but it was shorter, with Waif having to walk because Charmaine was carrying the bulging bag, to go along High Street instead. High Street, although it was one of the main streets, was far from seeming that way. It was twisting and narrow with no sidewalks, but the shops on either side were some of the best. Charmaine walked slowly along, looking into shops to give Waif time to keep up, dodging late shoppers and people just strolling before supper, and thinking. Her thoughts were divided between satisfaction. Peter has no excuse now for making any more horrible food, and amazement. Dad is a magic user. Always has been. Up until then, Charmaine had felt a lot of hidden guilt at the way that she had experimented with the book of palimpsest. But she found that had gone now. I think I may have inherited Dad's magic. Oh, great. Then I know I can do spells. But why does Dad always do what Mother says? He insists on me being respectable as much as Mother does. Honestly, parents. Charmaine found she was feeling very jolly altogether about this. At this point, there was a tremendous clatter of horse hooves coming up behind her, mixed with rumbling and deep shouts of, "Clear the way! Clear the way!" Charmaine glanced round and found riders in some kind of uniform filling the street, coming so fast that they were almost on top of her already. People on foot were flattening themselves against the shops and walls on either side of the street. Charmaine whirled round, reaching for Waif. She tripped over someone's doorstep and half knelt on the bag of food, but she got Waif and managed not to drop the bag. Holding Waif and the bag in both arms, she backed against the nearest wall while the horse's legs and men's feet in stirrups pounded past in front of her nose. Those were followed by a whole string of more galloping horses, shining black ones with long leather traces and a whip cracking across their backs. After them, a great colorful coach thundered by, glinting with gold and glass and painted shields, with 2 men in feathered hats swaying on the back of it. This was followed by yet more uniforms on horses galloping deafeningly. Then they were gone, away down the street and round the next bend. Waif whimpered. Charmaine sagged against the wall. What on earth was that? She said to the person flattened against the wall beside her. That, said the woman, was Crown Prince Ludovic, on his way to visit the king, I suppose. She was a fair and slightly fierce-looking lady who reminded Charmaine just a little of Sophie Pendragon. She was clutching a small boy who might have reminded Charmaine of Morgan, except that he was not making any noise at all. He looked to be shocked white rather than the way that Charmaine felt herself. "You ought to know better than that to go fast down a narrow street like this." Sorry. "You ought to know better than that to go fast down a narrow street like this," Charmaine said angrily. "Someone could have been hurt." She looked into her bag and discovered that the flan had broken in half and folded up, which made her angrier than ever. Why couldn't he gone down the embankment where it's wide? Doesn't he care?" "Not a lot," said the woman. "And I shudder to think what he'll be like when he's king," Charmaine said. "He's going to be dreadful." The woman gave her a strange, meaningful stare. I didn't hear you say that," she said. "Why?" asked Charmaine. "Ludovic doesn't like criticism," the woman said. "He has Lubbekins to enforce his feelings. Lubbekins, you hear, girl? Let's hope I was the only one who heard what you said." She heaved the little boy higher in her arms and walked away. Charmaine thought about this as she trudged through the town with Waif under one arm and the bag pulling at the other. "Are you going to keep carrying on until I let you onto the balcony?" "Okay." "As it please you, my love. My beloved little girl. My sweet baboon." Ugh. She's not happy until I'm cold. Charmaine thought about this as she trudged through the town with Waif under one arm and the bag pulling at the other. She found herself hoping that her king, Adolphus X, would go on living for a very long time. Or I might have to start a revolution, she thought. And my goodness, it feels like a long way to Great Uncle William's house today. She got there in the end, however, and put Waif down thankfully on the garden path. Indoors, Peter was in the kitchen, sitting on one of the 10 bags of laundry, staring moodily at a big red slab of meat on the table. Beside it were 3 onions and 2 carrots. "I don't know how to cook these," he said. "Well, you don't have to," Charmaine said, dumping her bag on the table. "I went to see my father this evening. And here," she added, fishing out 2 notebooks, "are recipes and spells that go with them." Both notebooks were rather the worse for flan. Cute. Charmaine wiped them off on her skirt and handed them over. Peter brightened up wonderfully and jumped off the laundry bag. "Oh, that's really useful," he said. "And a bag of food is better." Charmaine unpacked the bent flan, broken pasties, and squashed buns. The cream cake at the bottom had a knee-shaped dent in it, and it had oozed into some of the pasties. This made her angry with Prince Ludovic all over again. She told Peter all about it while she tried to reassemble the pasties. "Oh, yes, my mother says he's got the makings of a real tyrant," Peter said, a little absently because he was flipping through the notebooks. "She says that's why he left this country. That's why she left this country. Do I do these spells while I cook the food or before or after? Do you know?" "Dad didn't say. You'll have to work that one out," Charmaine said, and went away to Great Uncle William's study to find a soothing book to read. The 12-branched wand was interesting, but it made her feel as though her mind had broken into 100 little pieces. Each branch of the wand had 12 more branches going out of it, and 12 more from each of those. Much more, and I'd turn into a tree, Charmaine thought, as she searched the shelves. She chose a book called The Magician's Journey, which she hoped would be an adventure story. And it was, in a way, but she very soon realized that it was also a step-by-step account of how a magician learned his skills. Messages from somebody important to me. And this set her thinking again of how Dad had turned out to be a magic user. And I know I've inherited it, she thought. I learned to fly and I mended the pipes in the bathroom all in no time. But I ought to learn how to do it smoothly and quietly instead of shouting and bullying things. She was still sitting, pondering this, when Peter yelled at her to come and eat. "I used the spells," he said. He was very proud of himself. He'd warmed up the pasties and made a truly tasty mixture of the onions and carrots. "And," he added, "I was quite tired after a day of exploring." Looking for gold, Charmaine said. It's the natural thing to do, Peter said. We know it's somewhere in this house. But what I found instead was the place where the kobolds live. It's like a huge cave, and they were all there making things. Cuckoo clocks mostly, but some of them were making teapots, and some more were making something like a sofa near the entrance. I didn't speak to them. I didn't know if they were in the past or nowadays, so I just smiled and watched. I didn't want them angry again. What did you do today? Oh, goodness, Charmaine said. It was quite a day. It started with Twinkle out on the roof. I was so scared. She told him all the rest. Peter frowned. This Twinkle, he said, and this Sophie, are you quite sure they're not up to something sinister? Wizard Norland said fire demons are dangerous beings, you know. I did wonder, Charmaine admitted, but I think they're all right. It looks as if Princess Hilda called them in to help. I wish I knew how to find what the king is looking for. He got so excited when I found that family tree. Did you know that Prince Ludovic has 8 second cousins, mostly called Hans and Isola, and nearly all of them have met with sticky ends? Well, because they were all bad lots, Peter said. My mother said that Hans the Cruel was poisoned by Isola the Murderess, and she was killed by Hans the Drunkard when he was drunk. Then that Hans fell downstairs and broke his neck. His sister Isola was hanged over in Strangia for trying to kill the lord she married there. How many am I up to? 5, said Charmaine, quite fascinated. 3 to go. Those are 2 Matildas and another Hans, Peter said. Hans Nicholas, that one was, and I don't know how he died, except that he was somewhere abroad when he did. One of the Matildas was burned when her manor house caught fire, and they say the other one is such a dangerous witch that Prince Ludovic has her shut up in an attic in Castle Joy. Castel Joy. Nobody dares go near her, not even Prince Ludovic. She kills people just by looking at them. Is it all right that I gave way for that lump of meat? Probably, said Charmaine, if she didn't choke. How do you know all of these cousins? Or about all of these cousins? I've never even heard of them before today. Oh, that's because I come from Montalbino, Peter said. Everyone at my school knows all about the 9 bad cousins of High Norland. I suppose that in this country neither the king nor Prince Ludovic wanted to get around that their relatives were so vile. They say Prince Ludovic is as bad as the rest, too. And we're such a nice country, too. Really? Charmaine protested. She felt quite hurt that her own High Norland should have given birth to 9 such awful people. It seemed hard on the king as well. So, Chapter 12 concerns laundry and Lubbock eggs. Charmaine woke early on the following day because Waif stuck her small, cold nose into Charmaine's ear, obviously thinking that they needed to go to the royal mansion as usual. No, I don't need to go, Charmaine said crossly. The king has to look after Prince Ludovic today. Go away, Waif. I may turn into Isola and poison you, or Matilda and do evil magic on you. Just go. Waif pattered away. Sadly. But Charmaine was awake by then. Before long she got up, soothing her crossness by promising herself that she would spend a fine, lazy day reading The Magician's Journey. Peter was up too, and he had other ideas. We're going to do laundry today, he said. Have you noticed that there are 10 bags of it here now, and 10 more bags in Wizard Norland's bedroom? I think there may be 10 in the pantry as well. Charmaine glowered at the laundry bags. She could not deny that they filled up the kitchen rather. Well, let's not bother, she said. It must be those kobolds doing it. No, it isn't, Peter said. My mother says that laundry breeds if you don't wash it. We have a washerwoman, Charmaine said. I don't know how to wash things. Well, I'll show you how, Peter said. Stop hiding behind your ignorance. Angrily wondering how it was that Peter always managed to set her to work, Charmaine shortly found herself pumping hard at the pump in the yard, filling buckets with water for Peter to carry to the wash-house and empty into the great copper boiler. After about a 10th bucket full, Peter came back saying, We need to light a fire under the copper now, but I can't find any fuel. Where do you think he keeps it? Charmaine wiped a sweaty hair back from her face with an exhausted hand. It must work like the kitchen fire, she said. I'll go and see. She led the way to the shed, thinking, and if this doesn't work, we can stop trying. Good. We need just one thing that will burn, she told Peter. He looked blankly around. Inside of the shed, there was nothing but a stack of wooden tubs and a box of soap flakes. Charmaine eyed the place at the bottom of the boiler. It was black with old fires. She eyed the tubs. Too big. She had the soap flakes and decided not to risk another storm of bubbles. She went outside and plucked a twig from the unhealthy tree. Shoving this into the blackened fireplace, she slapped the other side of the boiler and said, "Fire!" and had to leap quickly backwards as the flames thundered into being underneath. "There," she said to Peter. "Oh, good," he said. "Well, back to the pump. We need the copper full now." "Why?" said Charmaine. "Because there's 30 seconds of washing, of course. We'll need to run hot water into some of these tubs to soak the silks and do the woolens in, and then we'll need water for rinsing, buckets and buckets more. Or, we'll need water for rinsing, buckets and buckets more." "I don't believe this," Charmaine muttered to Wave, who was pottering about watching. She sighed and went back to pumping. Meanwhile, Peter fetched out a kitchen chair and put it into the shed. Then, to Charmaine's indignation, he set out the tubs in a row and began pouring bucketfuls of her hard-worked-for cold water into them. "I thought those were for the copper," she protested. Peter climbed onto the chair and began hurling handfuls of soap flakes into the top of the boiler. It was now steaming and making a simmering noise. "Stop arguing and keep pumping," he said. "It's nearly hot enough for the whites now. 4 more buckets should do it, and then you can start putting shirts and things in." He climbed off the chair and went away into the house. When he came back, he was lugging 2 of the laundry bags, which he left propped against the shed while he went back for more. Charmaine pumped and panted and glowered and climbed on the chair to pour her 4 full buckets into the soapy clouds of steam rising from the copper. Then, glad to be doing something else, she untied the strings that held the first laundry bag closed. There were socks inside, and a red wizardly robe, 2 pairs of trousers and shirts and underclothes below that, all smelling of mildew from Peter's bathroom flood. Oddly enough, when Charmaine untied the second bag, there were the same identical things inside of it. Wizard's washing was bound to be peculiar, Charmaine said. She took armfuls of the washing, climbed onto the chair, and heaved the clothes into the copper. No, stop!" Peter shouted, just as Charmaine had emptied the second bagful in. He came rushing across the grass, towing 8 more bags all tied together. "But you said to do it!" Charmaine protested. "Not before we're sorted it out, you fool! You only boil the white things!" "Well, I didn't know," Charmaine said sullenly. She spent the rest of the morning sorting laundry into heaps on the grass, while Peter hurled the shirts into boil and ran off soapy water into tubs to soak robes and socks and 20 pairs of wizardly trousers in. As opposed to regular trousers. Wizardly trousers. Built wizard tough. At length he said, "I think the shirts have boiled enough." He pulled forward a swilling tub of cold water. "You put out the fire while I run the hot water off." Charmaine had not the least idea how you put a magical fire out. Experimentally, she slapped the side of the copper, and it burned her hand. She said, "Out! Fire! Go out!" in a sort of scream, and the fire obediently flickered down and disappeared. She sucked her fingers and watched Peter open up the tap at the bottom of the copper and send steaming pink suds gushing away down the drain. Charmaine peered through the steam as the tap ran. I didn't know the soap was pink," she said. "Oh, it wasn't. Oh, heavens, look at what you've done now." He leapt up on the chair and began heaving out steaming shirts with the forked stick meant for the purpose. Every one of them, as it splashed into the cold water, turned out to be a bright cherry pink. After the shirts, he forked out 15 tiny shrunken socks, all of which would have been too small for Morgan, and a baby-sized pair of wizardly trousers. Finally, he fished up a very small red robe and held it out accusingly, dripping and steaming for Charmaine to see. "That's what you did. You never put red wool in with white shirts. The dye runs, and it's turned out almost too small for a kobold. You are an utter fool." "Well, how was I to know?" Charmaine demanded passionately. "I've lived a sheltered life. Mother never lets me go near our wash house." "Because it's not respectable." "I know," he said disgustedly. Suppose you think I should be sorry for you. Well, I'm not. I'm not going to trust you anywhere near that mangle. The Lord knows what you do with it. I'm going to try a bleaching spell while I do the mangling. You go and get the clothesline and that tub of clothes pegs from the pantry and hang up everything to dry. Can I trust you not to hang yourself or something while you do that? I'm not a fool, Charmaine said haughtily. An hour or so later, when Peter and Charmaine, both weary and damp with steam, were soberly chewing yesterday's leftover pasties in the kitchen, Charmaine could not help but think that her efforts with the clothesline were rather more successful than Peter's, what with the mangle and the bleaching spell. Or with the mangle and the bleaching spell. The clothesline zigzagged 10 times back and forth across the yard, but it stayed up, unlike her other clothesline, which burnt down, fell over, and sank into the swamp. The shirts now flapping from pegs on it were not white, some were streaked with red. Some had curious pink curlicues all over them, and some others were a delicate blue. Most of the robes had white stripes on there somewhere. The socks and the trousers were all creamy white. Charmaine thought it very tactful of her that she did not point out to Peter that the elf, who was ducking and dodging among the zigzags of washing, was staring at it in grave amazement. So, apparently now, the High Wizard Norland has tie-dyed clothes. He is the hippie wizard.
The Hobbit's leaf has weakened your mind.
There's an elf out there, Peter exclaimed with his mouth full.
There's an elf out there,
Peter exclaimed with his mouth full. Charmaine swallowed the rest of her pasty and opened the back door to see what the elf wanted. The elf bent his tall, fair head under the doorway and stalked into the middle of the kitchen, where he put a glass box he was carrying down on the table. Inside of the box were 3 roundish white things, about the size of tennis balls. Peter and Charmaine stared at them, then at the elf, who simply stood there without speaking. What are these? The elf bowed very slightly. These, he said, are the 3 Lubbock eggs that we have removed from the wizard William Norland. It was a very difficult operation, but we have performed it successfully. Oh, Lubbock eggs, Peter and Charmaine exclaimed, almost together. Charmaine felt her face draining white and very much wished that she had not eaten that pasty. All of Peter's freckles showed up brown in his white face. Waif, who had been begging for luncheon to the table, set up a frantic whining. "What? Why have you brought the eggs here?" Charmaine managed to say. The elf said calmly, "Because we have found it impossible to destroy them. They defeat all of our efforts, magical and physical. We have finally concluded that only a fire demon is capable of destroying them, and Wizard Norland informs us that Miss Charming will by now have made contact with a fire demon." "The Wizard Norland's alive? He's talking to you?" Peter said eagerly. "Indeed," said the elf. "He is recovering well and should be ready to return here in 3 or 4 days at the most." "Oh, I'm so glad," Charmaine said. "So those Lubbock eggs in him that were making him ill?" "That is so," the elf agreed. "It seems that the wizard encountered a Lubbock some months ago while walking in the mountain meadow. The fact that he is a wizard has caused the eggs to absorb his magic and become nearly impossible to destroy. You are warned not to touch the eggs, nor attempt to open this box that they are in. They are extremely dangerous. You are advised to obtain the services of the fire demon as soon as possible." While Peter and Charmaine gulped and stared at those 3 white eggs in their box, the elf gave another small bow and stalked away through the inner door. Peter pulled himself together and ran after him, shouting to know more, but he arrived in the living room to see the front door slamming shut. When he, followed by Charmaine, followed by Waif, rushed out into the front garden, there was no sign of the elf at all. Charmaine caught sight of Rollo peering slyly around the stalks of hydrangeas, but the elf had gone completely. She picked up Waif and planted her in Peter's arms. "Peter," she said, "keep Waif here. I'll go and get Calcifer at once." And she set off at a run down to the garden path. "Be quick!" Peter shouted after her. "Be very quick!" Charmaine did not need Peter to tell her that. She ran, followed by Waif's despairing and squeaky howls, and ran and went on running until she had rounded the great cliff and could see the town ahead. There she had to drop to a hasty walk and clutch at the stitch in her side, but she kept on as fast as she could. The thought of those round white eggs sitting on the kitchen table was enough to make her break into a trot as soon as her breath came back. Suppose the eggs hatched before she had found Calcifer. Suppose Peter did something stupid like trying to put a spell on them. Suppose... Oh, she tried to take her mind off of all of the other awful possibilities by panting to herself. I'm so stupid. I could have asked that elf what elf gift was, but I clean forgot. I should have remembered. I'm so stupid. But her heart was not really in it. All she could see in her mind was Peter mumbling spells over the glass box. It'd be just like him to try. It came on to pour with rain as she entered the town. Charmaine was pleased. That should take Peter's mind off of the Lubbock eggs. He would have to rush outside and bring the washing in before it got soaked again. Just so long as he hadn't done something stupid before that. She arrived at the royal mansion, soaked through and almost out of breath entirely, when she clattered at the knocker and rang the bell even more frantically than she had when Twinkle was on the roof. It seemed an age before Sim opened the door. "Oh, Sim," she gasped. "I need to see Calcifer at once. Can you tell me where he is?" "Oh, certainly, miss," Sim replied, not in the least put out by Charmaine's soaking hair and dripping clothes. "Sir Calcifer is presently in the grand lounge. Allow me to show you the way." He shut the door and shuffled off, and Charmaine dripped her way after him, down the long damp hallway, past the stone staircase, to a grand doorway somewhere near the back of the mansion, where Charmaine had never been before. "In here, miss," he said, throwing the grand but shabby door open. Charmaine went into a roar of voices and a crowd of finely dressed people, who all seemed to be shouting at one another while they walked around, eating cake off of elegant little plates. The cake was the first thing she recognized. It stood grandly on a special table in the middle of the room, although it was only half of it was there by now. It was definitely the same cake that her father's cooks had been working on yesterday evening. It was like seeing an old friend among all these finely dressed strangers. The nearest man, who was dressed in midnight blue velvet and a dark blue brocade, turned and stared haughtily down at Charmaine, and then exchanged disgusted looks with the lady beside him. This lady was wearing not exactly a ball dress, not a tea time, Charmaine thought. Silks and satins so sumptuous that she would have made Aunt Sempronia look shabby had Aunt Sempronia been there. Aunt Sempronia was not there, but the Lord Mayor was, and so was his lady, and so were all of the most important people in town. "Sim," asked the man in midnight blue, "just who is this wet little commoner?" "Pepperoni." "Lady Charming," Sim replied, "is the new assistant to His Majesty, Your Highness." He turned to Charmaine. "Allow me to present to you His Highness, Crown Prince Ludovic, my lady." He stepped backwards and shut himself outside of the room. Charmaine felt that the floor would be doing her a favor if it opened under her soaking wet feet and dropped her into the cellars. She'd clean forgotten about the visit of Crown Prince Ludovic. Princess Hilda had obviously invited all of the best people of High Norland to meet the prince, and she, ordinary Charmaine Baker, had gate-crashed the tea party. Pleased to meet you, Your Highness," she tried to say, but it came out as a frightened whisper. Prince Ludovic probably did not hear. He laughed and said, "Is Lady Charming some kind of nickname the king calls you, little girl?" He pointed with his cake fork at the lady not quite in the evening dress. "I call my assistant Lady Moneybags. She costs me a fortune, you see." Charmaine opened her mouth to explain what her name really was, but the lady not quite in evening dress got it first. You'd no call to say that," she said angrily. "You spiteful thing, you." Prince Ludovic laughed and turned away to talk to the colourless gentleman who was approaching in a colourless grey silk outfit. Charmaine would have tiptoed away at once to find Calcifer, except that, as the prince turned, the light from the big chandelier overhead caught him in the side face. The eye, she could see, glowed deep purple. Charmaine stood like a cold statue in horror. Prince Ludovic was a Lubbocan. For a moment she could not move, knowing she was showing her horror, knowing that the people could see how horrified she was and wondered why. The colourless gentleman was already looking at her, with curiosity in his mild mauve eyes. Oh, heavens, he was Lubbocken too! That was what had worried her before when she'd met him in the kitchens. Fortunately, the Lord Mayor moved away from beside the cake just then, to bow deeply to the king, and gave Charmaine a glimpse of a rocking horse. No, there were many rocking horses Charmaine saw. It quite distracted her from her horror. For some reason, rocking horses were lined up all around the walls of the grand room. Twinkle was sitting on the ground nearest the large marble fireplace, staring at her earnestly. Charmaine could tell that he knew she had had a shock of some kind, and wanted her to tell him what had caused it. She began edging her way towards the fireplace. This gave her a sight of Morgan, sitting by the marble fender, playing with a box of bricks. Sophie was standing over him, in spite of Sophie's peacock blue dress and her air of being part of the tea party. Charmaine had a moment when she saw Sophie as a very large lioness with its teeth bared, standing on guard over its small lion cub. Ah, yes, Tigrita. Con su Tigritita. Oh, hello, Charming, Princess Hilda said, more or less in Charmaine's ear. Would you like some cake since you're here? Charmaine shot a regretful look at the cake and inhaled its luscious smell instead. No, thank you, ma'am, she said. I only came with a message for, Mrs. Pendragon, you see. Where was Calcifer? Well, there she is, just over there, Princess Hilda said, pointing. I must say the children are behaving beautifully at the moment. Long may it last. She swished away to offer another finely dressed person some cake. For all its swishing, the dress was nothing like as fine as the others in the room. It was faded almost white in places and reminded Charmaine rather of the laundry after Peter had worked his bleaching spell. Oh, please, don't let Peter try any of those spells on the Lubbock eggs. Charmaine prayed as she walked over to Sophie. Oh, hello, Sophie said, smiling rather tensely. Beyond her, Twinkle was rocking on the rocking horse, going creak, 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 quite irritatingly. The fat nursemaid was standing beside him, going, Master Twinkle, pray do not get down from there. You're making such a noise. Do get down from there. You're making such a noise, Master Twinkle. Master Twinkle, I don't want to have to tell you twice, over and over. This was probably even more irritating. So Sophie knelt down and passed Morgan a red brick. Morgan held the brick out towards Charmaine. Blue brick, he told her. Charmaine knelt down too. No, it isn't blue, she said. Try again. Sophie murmured out of the side of her mouth. Glad to see you. I don't care for this prince at all, do you? Nor that overdressed floozy with him. Opal? Morgan guessed, holding the brick out again. I don't blame you, Charmaine whispered to Sophie. No, it's not purple, it's red. But the prince is purple, or his eyes are. He's a Lubbocken. A what? Sophie said, puzzled. Dead, asked Morgan, looking his brick disbelievingly. Went the rocking horse. Yes, red, said Charmaine. I can't explain here. Tell me where Calcifer... I'll explain it to him and then he can tell you. But I need Calcifer urgently. Well, here I am, Calcifer said. What do you need me for? Charmaine looked around. Calcifer was roosting among the flaming logs in the fireplace, mingling his blue flames with the orange ones from the logs, and looking so peaceful that Charmaine had quite failed to notice him until he spoke. Oh, thank goodness, she said. Can you come with me at once to Wizard Norland's house? We've got an emergency there that only a fire demon can deal with. Please. So, tune in next time for Chapter 13, in which Calcifer is very active. But, in the meantime, it has been 43 minutes. I am starting to feel woozy, so I need to have a midnight snacko. A 9 o'clock snacko. And I think I'm going to spend the rest of the evening in quiet contemplation of a lovely book so that I can have it ready so I can read it for you before Halloween. So, I love you very much. Get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate without knowing a thing about you, then I can love you for exactly the same reason. Sleep well, dearest.